Hey everybody, today I'm going to walk you through a crash course. I'm going to try to keep this under 30 minutes of Articulate Storyline 360. I have done this before, you can check out my previous one, but I wanted to do this because it's been a few years and I wanted to make sure this was up to date. And especially since there has been a lot that has changed with Articulate Storyline 360, and it's really not to be an exhaustive course. You can check out an exhaustive course by going to my website, learningdojo.ninja. If you go to courses, you can see the Create e-learning courses with Articulate Storyline 360. This one is almost up to 10 hours. And so I cover everything from A to Z. I dive into all the different topics and really get to show you everything about the tool. So if you wanted to dive more into that, I do update that every couple of years and just make sure that it's up to date and you don't have to pay for the updates. And so you automatically get the latest version whenever I come out with a new version there. So I wanted to mention that, but let's go ahead and dive in here. And if you go to articulate.com, this is where you can get the platform. So this is the Articulate 360 platform. If you hover over the platform, you can see all of the different products. So we have the AI assistant, which is now included. And I know there's been a lot of people that have been kind of upset by that because Articulate, instead of deciding to include it in their base price, they basically upped their price and now it's included and you don't really have a choice to not have it, which I think there's a lot of arguments about that are valid arguments. I did mention to Articulate that I thought it'd be better if they just included it because I think every tool should just have AI, but that was their choice. And that's something that's honestly, if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you. There are other authoring tools that are out there. So I don't really get into those arguments, but it is something that is a valid argument. And I just wanted to acknowledge it here at least. But what I want to do is, and this is typically what I do, is I focus on what the tool can do. You can decide if you can afford it, if it's with your organization. Most organizations that I've been to just pay for the tool and then you basically just have access to it. So I'm not really the one worrying about the price most of the time. But if I'm doing consulting, that's when I think it's a little bit harder to kind of swallow there. So completely understand. All right, so the AI assistant is there and it does help with development. And also Rise, an AI assistant is built into Rise and it is built into Storyline. So you get access to all of that. Localization, I think, is an extra cost still. I hope that they actually add that in because I think that's a crucial component of development. The review tool is included and the Reach tool is their own LMS that is a pretty nice LMS, but it does cost extra as well, depending on the number of seats that you want. Now, Storyline itself is a Windows-based only application. I am a Mac person. I wish that they had a Mac application. Honestly, the only reason why I use Parallels or VMware is because of Storyline. That is literally the only reason why I have to have Parallels and or VMware installed on my computer. So I completely agree with anybody that says, I wish there was a Mac version. It is kind of rewriting and having to have two different versions. So I can see Articulate's point, but come on, we need a Mac version of Storyline, and that would be honestly the best day ever if they ever release that. So that is something I completely agree with you, but VMware, I believe, is free now. You just do have to have a license to Windows, and you can have that installed. And if you're using a Mac M1 version or beyond, you do, it runs it pretty well. And so you can have VMware and you can have Windows and Storyline installed and go back and forth between the two different platforms. All right, so with that said, let's go ahead and dive in here. So inside of Storyline, when you first launch it, you'll see on the left-hand side, the ability to start a new project, to record your screen, to import a PowerPoint. If you have PowerPoints, you can import them. You can start from the PowerPoint. If you just want to like extract images from a PowerPoint, that's typically the route I go, because I want full control of how it's built. Although it's gotten better as far as the PowerPoint conversion, it's gotten better. And so you could just start from there as well. Now there are other tools out there like Quizmaker and Engage, but I think those are going away eventually, so I wouldn't actually use those. But if you did have those, you can import them. And then all your recent projects over here, or you can go see the eLearning Heroes community as well. So you can click on that and they have a very active community that you can check out. I'm going to go ahead and start a new project. Now, every course that you create is going to be a project. That project, you want to keep the project file because if you want to make updates later, you're going to need that project file. If you export this out for like a learning management system, you'll have what's called a SCORM package. That SCORM package is essentially a zip file that you upload to the LMS. However, if you're going to make changes to that course, you do not make changes to the SCORM package. You will need to make changes to the project file. So the very first thing I do when I come in and I start a new project is I come up and I click on the Save button up on top. This will prompt me to save my project on my desktop or somewhere. So this is something that I want to basically go back and reference at some point. So this will create what's called a .story file that you can see up on top. But if I come back on my Mac side here, you can see that I have my .story file. I've run into so many times where a developer wants to go back in and make some changes, but they did not keep the story file. So that's why I emphasize to make sure that you keep the story file in order to go back in and make changes. Otherwise, you're having to rebuild the entire course from all the different images from that SCORM package. It's a pain. So I like to focus on that. All right, so the very first view that I see when I'm inside a storyline is my story view. My story view is kind of like a bird's eye view of your entire course. You can see all of the branching, you can see all of the different scenes and so forth. Now, the way that I usually recommend to structure your course is to put your scenes into modules and chapters. And so if you have different sections, I would create a scene for each section. That helps I think in the menu, that helps organization. So it's not just a bunch of pages. You're actually separating it into scenes. You're separating it into collapsible areas. And so the learner is only focused on a few pages rather than 30 or 50 pages over on the left-hand side. So that's something I always recommend, is basically creating different scenes and organizing your content into those scenes. So you can create a new scene over on the top on your homepage in this story view if you click on New Scene on the top. Now those two scenes are not connected. I will need to branch from the end of one scene to the next scene, and I can talk about triggers. We're not going to dive too much into it, but at the end of it, you will want to make sure that the next button jumps to a scene rather than a page. So that is just kind of something I see people get caught up on is, okay, it's not going, I'm clicking the next button, it's not going to the next scene. So we'll talk about that. All right, so then we have the intro scene. I can go ahead and I can double click on the scene and I can name this whatever I want. So I can come in and say module 1, and on the second one, we'll say module 2. The scene that has the red flag is our starting scene. And I can change that by selecting this next scene and clicking on starting scene, and that will change module 2 into the starting scene. Now this number 1, that just basically says it's the first scene. But I'm going to go back into module 1 and change that so that is the first scene. So sometimes if you're mixing up scenes and you create the module 1 introduction first and you decide, oh, I want to have a starter module, then you can swap it up with the new starter scene. And that will be the very first scene that actually gets created. So that is just something to keep in mind here. All right, so now it starts you out with each scene, it starts you out with a slide. If you need to rename the slide, you can just double click on the slide title, and then you can give it into a name something else. Now, the story view is also helpful to see all of your triggers. If you select a page, you can see triggers across several different pages. You can also see slide properties. Slide properties adjust if different buttons are visible, but also does the page auto advance? Does it stop at the end of the page and require the learner to actually interact with the page? Or if you wanted to hide certain buttons on a page, you can do that by going into the slide properties. So I can jump to pages and change a bunch of the properties across several pages inside of this story view. So this is an important view to come back to be able to adjust that. Now, once I'm inside of a page, I can go into the properties and I can adjust the properties there too. So you don't have to come into the story view to adjust the properties, but it is a useful view to adjust properties, especially if I hold down Shift. I can adjust properties all by selecting several pages. I can adjust properties across several pages all at once. So that is something to keep in mind. Now to go into a page, you just double click on it. Now this, like I mentioned, is PowerPoint on steroids. And so you are creating slide by slide pages. And so they are not responsive pages, meaning that they will not adapt and adjust depending on the user's screen size. They will get smaller. So they're still viewable on a mobile device. They're still viewable on a tablet. It is mobile friendly in that case, but it's not the friendly part of it adjusting based on that. That's more of Rise. Rise is great if you wanted to adjust and have things adapt to the size, but where Rise comes into play, or kind of the fault of Rise, or I guess the weakness of Rise, is that it's not customizable. You can't go in and create triggers yet. They are getting to that point where you can add custom layouts, but even those layouts act like Storyline, where they just kind of shrink and stuff. And so it's kind of depending on the experience that you want. A lot of the times, if I want to create something complex and like a game, I'll use Storyline. If I want something that's just text-based, more text-based and image-based, I'll create Rise because it's quicker and easier. So that's one of the main differences between the two different tools there. All right, so let's go in here, and on this slide, you can see everything in module 1. So if I create more slides, I can see everything there, and I can swap between the different modules by selecting this drop-down box here. Or if you right-click, you can go to New Slide, then you go to Basic Slides, and you can have some basic layouts very similar to PowerPoint, but I usually just start with a blank page here. Now you could also come up to New Slide up on top and do the same thing. So if you right click or just come up to the top, if you're on the home page, you can insert new pages there. So you start to build all of the pages for module 1. Then you go into module 2, and then you start to build all the pages for module 2. And so all of the different things that you want there. Now, whatever you create on page 1 will only be visible on page 1, and then page 2 will only be visible on page 2. So it is slide by slide basis. Now, if I come back into module 1 and go back into the introduction page, I still see my triggers. I still see layers. This is what I find more useful compared to other tools like Captivate. Captivate is great, but Captivate doesn't have layers. I really love layers because I can hide and show things based and create an interaction that's a little bit easier to organize than having to group objects and hide and show and group objects. Captivate still has some benefits, and so if you're used to Captivate, great, but this is just something that I really like about Storyline, is being able to create layers. If I wanted to go back into the properties though, I just come down to the gear icon, and I can go back into those properties of deciding if I want to show the next button, back button, how the slide advances by the user or automatically. So those settings are down at the bottom. Now from here, I just start to build out the layout of my page. Now there are different templates and a template library that you can use if you wanted to just start from that. However, I recommend that you learn how to build pages yourself. And so you build out the design, and you can use those just to add to it or even come up with the design. But you are going to need to, in any type of job, you're going to need to come up with your own layouts. So that's why I think it's useful to know how to create your own layouts as well. So if I come into here and go into the Insert tab, these are all my different components. And honestly, when I ever show anybody new software application, I always talk to them about 3 different things. About getting to know the actors. It's almost like a screenplay. So when you're writing a screenplay, you get to know, or you're creating a movie, essentially, you get the different actors and the different components that kind of match what you want. And then you bring those different actors, you bring those different components together, and then you can stylize that with hair and makeup and other things like that. That's where the style comes into play. And then the behavior is basically telling it what to do. When this button is clicked, this happens. When this page loads, this happens. That's where triggers come into play. So that's kind of how I distinguish building it out is almost like creating, or building out the pages is creating the structure. Adding the different components is also creating the structure. But then you start to adjust the style. And that style is like cascading style sheets, CSS. That's the style of any website is CSS. So let's come into the components, and this is under the Insert tab. Now in the components, we have our AI assistant that will help us create components, but we also have different things like characters. We have illustrations, we have icons, we have videos that we can bring in as well. And this is from the Content Library 360 that we have access to. So in a lot of ways, we can just use what's in the Content Library 360 and don't have to use our own images. But we can still use our own images. We can bring in images, we can use shapes, we can use captions, we can use equations for math equations, we can use our own video, and this could be video from a file, or this can be video from a website like YouTube or Vimeo. This also could be audio. Now with audio, there is text to speech, and so if you don't want to record your own voice, you can just type out the text. And with AI, this text-to-speech has gotten a lot better. And so it's initially it was kind of robotic, but this is so much better than it used to be. And you can have text boxes and tables and slide numbers that you can put that will automatically update. You can have buttons, and this is more of the interactive stuff. Sliders that then adjust things, dials, hotspots, inputs, markers, scrolling panels. Because it doesn't create like a long scrolling page, you basically create a panel that then scrolls content inside of there. So there's a lot of different options there. Now, if you want to adjust the size of your page, you do that by coming into the Design tab and going into Slide Size. One of the first things I do, I like to have a 16:9 ratio. I like to be more widescreen than tall, just because if you're on tablet and you're in landscape, it's going to look a little bit better. So what I do not use the default, which is 4:3. That's so small. If you're going to have this on an iPad, your content is going to look very pixelated. So very first thing I do is I come in here and I adjust this to 16:9, but then I bump up with the locked aspect ratio. I bump that up to at least 1000. And that will then adjust the height automatically when I hit tab. And so it just keeps that lock there. Now I do this at the very first so it doesn't try to scale, because if you have content, it will scale and it will distort some of your images. And so it's easier to do this at the very beginning. And then you can also just set this as default. So right here, this is already my default size. But if you make any adjustments, if you click on current default or set to default, every new project you create will automatically be at that size. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK here. And I just wanted to make sure that you knew that is how you resize your different pages. Now we start to use the components to put stuff together. So we can use shapes, we can use text to create our different pages, we can bring in images, we can crop our images as well. Like I mentioned, this is not exhaustive. And so we're already halfway through in our 30 minutes. And so I wanted to basically dive in and show you some of the different options, but there's a lot more that I dive into in my course. So let's go ahead and start out by coming into the Insert tab. Let's go and find an image. So I'm going to use an image by going into Photos, and I'm going to use the Content Library 360. Now this will depend on my topic. And so let's say I'm creating a new hire orientation, or this is more of like a standards of conduct. This is how our organization acts and so forth. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say office. So typically I will just search for the theme of an object, and I will go grab something like that. And there's both landscape and there's horizontal images. It doesn't really matter because you can crop, if it's a landscape, you can crop it into horizontal. So just find the image that works best for you. I'm going to go ahead and find this image here and click on Insert. Now it does say AI auto generation settings, and so this will generate captions for me automatically for alt text and so forth. So great. I'll go ahead and leave that. Now I like to have a good splash screen when somebody first comes to the course and have a title page. So introduce them, standards of conduct, and this is welcome to Acme Inc. or something like that. So I use usually a full screen image to kind of show that. And you can see here that we have white bars on the side, so it's not exactly right. But what we can do is we can kind of stretch that out. If you grab the left-hand side of the image or the right-hand side of the image, you can stretch that out and see that. Now, if you don't see everything, if it's kind of zoomed in, for example, I'm going to zoom in here. Let's say you're zoomed in really drastically. Typically what I like to do is come into the View tab and then I click on Fit to Window. That's typically how I work because I like to see all of the content. And if I start to minimize things down at the bottom, it will then adapt to whatever size and the amount of space that I have here. But the problem is with stretching it out like that is it doesn't have, I don't really see where the top of the screen is anymore. So the next thing I do is I come into the Format tab. Whenever you have something selected, a Format tab will appear. If you don't have it selected, it's gone. So if you select that image and go into Format, then you can go into Crop here. This will then allow you to crop the image. And so usually I drag it down below the page. And so I can see now the page here, that white area. And then I just drag it up to kind of have it snap to the top of that page. Now, if I go down to the bottom, I do the same thing on the bottom. I can see where the bottom of that page is and then just have it snap there. If I then uncheck that crop, this is now perfectly in the middle here. So everything that I see on that image is basically going to be on screen. So now I can start to add things to it. I can start to add shapes, I can start to add text and so forth. Now this is where shapes come into play. Shapes allow you to create different designs, because right now if I add text to this image, it's going to be kind of hard to see that text. And so what I will do is I will use a shape to kind of fade out the image a little bit. Or you can also adjust the image using the Format tab. So either way, you can kind of approach it differently here. But if you go into Format, you can go into Recolor, and then you can adjust the color if you wanted like a dark variation, if you wanted kind of like a red color, if you wanted to like a sepia tone, if you wanted a green color, or if you wanted to click on more variations, you can adjust your own color here. You can also set transparent color. It doesn't work that well. I would rather use Photoshop in that case, but you can, in some cases it does work fine. So that's something that you can do. Let's go ahead and do kind of like a dark blue here. And that allows me to then add text. So I could do it that way, or what you can do is you can insert a shape. If you come into shape and you come in and just add a shape here, and if I was to place that shape over the box here, or over the image, what I could do is come into the Format tab, and then I can adjust the shape to be like a black color. Now, when I adjust the shape to be a black color, I can then up the transparency, and I can do that by entering in a number here, or I can adjust the dial here by upping the transparency, and that kind of creates a little bit more of a fade. I kind of like this, so the text would stand out a little bit more. I still like that blue tint, so I'm glad I did that. But now adding this fade adds a little bit more to it. It depends on what the style is that you want, but I would try to use as the least amount of shapes that you can in order to reduce the file size of your project. Because if you start to add a bunch of shapes, it's not going to take up a lot of space, but eventually if you're adding a ton, it's going to take up a lot more space. So that is something to keep in mind. Where are your learners? Do your learners have fast, high-speed internet? Or if you're a global organization, if you're dealing with different parts of the world that don't have as fast of internet, then you'll want to take all that into consideration there. Whenever my students come up and they see me at a conference or something, they're like, I've took your course, and one thing I learned about the course is you don't like outlines. It's true, I don't like outlines, but it's funny that that's like the thing that sticks out to people is with shapes. I wish you could have outlines just gone by default, because they just add extra bulk to it and they don't look good, and they're kind of a different color of it. So honestly, one of the first things I say is whenever you're using a shape, get rid of the outline. So you can come into shape outline and then just click on no outline. Now, because I kind of stretched that out, there really is not making much of a difference, but it's just funny that that's like what people catch on to as well. Now on the timeline, I do have it minimized. It starts to basically adapt to whatever shape that you're adding. So it starts to just randomly name your objects as you start to add those objects here. I like to spend time and just give those objects a name. So I will give those objects a name. I will call this one something, if you double click on it, something like fader. The reason why I do that is because when I start to add interactivity to those objects, it is better to have it as like fader, person, Jane, Joe, anything like that, so I know exactly what object I'm talking to. Because when I start to add JavaScript or I start to add custom triggers, you may not know which one is shape or rectangle or square or things like that. So that's why, and it's better organized as well. So if I was a developer taking over another project, if I see that somebody is actually naming their layers, I know that they're a little bit more professional that way because they've taken the time to organize. And I don't know, this is just the clean freak in me as far as that goes. I like to have things organized there. That is basically just adding shapes. Now you could even like add different shapes, just half, if you wanted to have text on the side. You could even come up to format. Let's go into shape fill here, and I'm going to go into gradient. So in gradient, I could have like half of the shape be like a faded transparent color. So there's a lot that you can do with that. But let's come into text and let's go into the text box, and we're going to add some text here. And on the text under the format tab, you can see the font where I can adjust the font. Oh, it's actually under the home tab, not the format tab. Forgot to mention that. But now I can come in here and say standards of conduct. Now this is all black, but I can change this to, I just did a Control C or a Control A to select everything. And now I can select, let me make sure that it's selected everything. All right, so now I'm gonna go up here and I'm gonna change the font color to white so it stands out a little bit more. You can also, I wanna bump this up so it's really big. So I'm gonna come in up here, that's probably a little too big. Let's come here and just get that right about there. And then I can center it, and as you start to drag it on the stage, you can see little hints once you have it centered completely. I like my title to be really bold. So you can either do that by dragging it in the middle, but if you click on Format, there's also these align tools that you can use to kind of align it that way as well. So if you're gonna have different sizes, you can either do it one of two ways. You can have a different size like Acme ink, and you can adjust it this way, or you can add another text box. It's up to you. The other text box does give you a little bit more control over position, because right here, I can, if I come back into the Home tab, I can center that, and then I can adjust like the paragraph spacing if I wanted to by clicking on this little expand button here, and this will expand other settings. So the spacing I can adjust if I want it to be single line, double line, if I wanted it to be even less spacing as well, or more spacing, and that's more between the different lines there. You can adjust this, like before text, the indentation of it. So there's a couple things you can do there. Or I can come in here and I can also adjust the size of, just by selecting that text, I can adjust the size of just that text there. Let's go ahead and preview it. The navigation will get added on preview. Right now you're just worried about the slide, but the navigation gets added, like the plus or the next and the back button and the menu gets added when you preview it. And that's called the player. The player controls the navigation between the different slides. So I can have a next or a begin button if I wanted to, or you can come to the next and back button down at the bottom. It's up to you. I'd tell my students to avoid like duplicate navigation, having something here and there. So if you did, and this will get us into more of the triggers, but if you did want to add a button, you can come in here and add a button. And really you can take any shape and turn it into a button. But if you wanted to add something like begin here, what I would do is recommend changing this into a different color so it's not that default blue. And then if you kind of center it, you can see that now I can add a trigger. A trigger is the behavior. If you click on something, what happens? And in this case, we're going to jump to the next page. But triggers are so vast of what you can do that we definitely don't have enough time. We're actually hitting up to 30 minutes right now. And so it's not enough time to cover triggers. Like I mentioned, there's a lot that goes into this application. But let's come in here and add a quick trigger. If you click on add a trigger, there's 3 different parts of a trigger. Okay, what happens? When does it happen? And in what condition does it happen? Does it always happen, or does it only happen in certain situations? That's really what a condition is. So in this case, we're going to jump to the next slide. But if you select this drop-down box, there's a lot more things that you can do. You can play media, you can show a layer, you can hide a layer, you can show a light box, you can pause the timeline. So this is where you get into an interactivity. And this honestly is where you stand out as a developer. If you create something that is more interactive and you go into an interview with a game or something like that, which we talk about in the course, if you go in with a game, that's going to help you stand out more. If I interview somebody that has a bunch of interactivity, boom, that sells me on them, because there's a lot more work that they've put into it, and it shows me that they know storyline a lot better as well. So that's like one of the recommendations I would say is add interactivity, not just basic slides, add interactivity into your course and really show that off. All right, so for now, we're just gonna jump to the next slide. But in this case, because I have a next button that gets added, I'm gonna hide that next button. So I'm gonna click on the gear icon. I'm gonna uncheck next and back. Now, it only does it for this slide. Because I'm already jumping to that next slide using that begin button, there's no reason to have that next button there too. Now, I'm gonna preview this entire scene, not just that one page. I'm gonna preview the entire scene here. And you can do that by selecting the drop-down box and going into this scene. That allows me to see both pages here. And so if you have multiple pages, you can see both of those pages and have that be able to like control and navigate between the different pages here. So you can see there's our begin button. There's no next and back button, which is great. We have other controls like volume and playback speed and so forth. But if I click on begin, then it takes me to the next page and it automatically marks things off as well. I could hide that, so if I don't want them to focus on the menu, I could hide it as well. But this is one of the benefits of having it in a scene, is you can minimize and group different pages together for better organization. All right, so now we just start building out our other pages. Now, one thing I forgot to point out, let's go ahead and preview this again. One thing I forgot to point out is if you hit begin, that next and back button come back if you have that enabled on that. So you can disable that on certain settings or you can enable it. So at this point, and I'm going to do this real quick, then you start to build out more pages. So this is where I can come in and add another page or another image. And let's just do something quick here. I'm going to just select another image and I'm going to move this to the left-hand side. I'm going to crop this to be just kind of half the page there. And you can move that if you wanted to. So it's like centered, crop is a little bit different. And then you can come in and you can add some text. Now, if you add a text box, let me go ahead and show you like a quick trick here. If you do equal sign, lorem open close parentheses, and then hit enter, it automatically creates text for you. Now, I did learn something else that I want to try, and I didn't look it up before this, but if you hit lorem, and then inside of those parentheses, you do like 2, 5, and then hit enter, it basically just creates the 2, I think, is the number of paragraphs. 5, I believe, is the number of sentences, I think, but it does do something if you do adjust that. So if I come in here and do equals lorem, open close parentheses, 3, and then 5, you can see it create 3 paragraphs. Now it didn't do 5 sentences, and so I have to figure that part out, but it did create 3 sentences there. Little shortcut key to be able to do that and create some text, and you can format that text how you want, and then you can start to animate the text. And so if we have some text, I'm going to go ahead and just select that text. And now we're hitting on the 30-minute mark, and so I'm trying to go a little bit quick here because we still have a lot to cover. But if I come in here and go into insert and then go into text to speech, and so we're using our AI tool, we haven't even gone into the AI assistant. So the AI assistant allows you to generate some text, and so we'll do that here in a second. But you can also insert audio and do text to speech. So if you come in here and do text to speech, then any audio or text that you had selected will automatically be there, but you can adjust it. You can adjust the voice as well. So you can select the voice and then you can hit generate text. Now that will generate the text for you using their AI assistant. And then you basically adds it to the slide. And then you can start to time things up to your slide. Now the AI assistant will even time that up for you. So you can say, hey, animate the text to the audio, and we'll do that once this is done here. So the AI assistant is very useful to help you create text, to modify text, to extract text, or to help you understand text. It's almost having like ChatGPT included inside of Storyline. So you don't have to pay for ChatGPT if this is mostly what you do is create Storyline courses. But so that's really where the cost kind of like makes up for it. If you're using the AI assistant, you don't have to have Grammarly, you don't have to have other tools. You can still use those other tools to help you storyboard. They do a good job in storyboarding, but it's something that you can just insert or have it generate text there for you inside of Storyline. All right, so there's our audio. I can go ahead and hit play.
Lorem ipsum dolor sit med.
So now if I click on insert, this will insert audio to my slide. Now here's the cool thing. In the AI assistant, I can say, hey, animate my text to my audio. You can also add interactivity here. You can say, make this animate in, or have this like the image animate in, or if you have different pages, you can also have it say, or different tabs, you can say, have it be interactive, have this create a game or something like that. So there's a lot that I haven't explored yet, but that is something that is fairly new. So you can see here, one change successful, entrance animation added to text box. Now, if you select this little triangle, notice that it also animated, and you can do this along the timeline, but it animated the different paragraphs along with the text. So now if I go ahead and I preview this, let's preview this slide. Before I would have to go in and I'd have to create the animation. I would then have to time up by paragraph and to the audio, but now it does it for me just using the AI assistant. Definitely time saver. So that's where I think the cost could make up for productivity.
Lorem ipsum dolor sit med, Messinas fortiter congue massa. Fuse possuere, magna sed pulvinar ultritiae.
So you can see as it starts to play, I'm going to go ahead and mute this, but as it starts to play, that the text will come in at different times. So it just automatically animates to the text there. This is just scratching the surface, but this is how you start to create your different slides. This is how you start to create interactivity. At the end here, there's a couple things that you can do. Again, we're just scratching the surface. If you want to dive in more, check out my course. So let's say I'm ready to kind of finalize some things. If I come into my home tab, and if I come into player, this is where I can adjust some of the things about the player. I can adjust the color. I can adjust the different labels of the text box. So let me pull this up here. I can decide if I want to have a menu or not, if the menu's on the left-hand side, if the menu starts collapsed, so it's not extended to begin with. You can adjust that just by clicking on the button. If you don't want there to be a volume button, if you don't want there to be captions button, you can turn these different things off and on. If you come into color and effects, you can come in and change this from a dark player to a light player, or you can adjust it and add your color. So whatever the color of your organization is, you can go ahead and adjust that as well. So that is just adjusting the player and everything that's kind of around the player. So that's something that to keep in mind there. So this is where I can add a custom color and choose the color and background and choose the font and different things like that. So the very last thing you want to do is you want to publish this, because the project file is not something that can be visible on a learning management system. You can publish it just to web, but it's not going to be tracked. But if you go into the LMS, this is where you choose between SCORM 1.2, 2004, XAPI, or CMI5. You'll get a lot more data with XAPI and CMI5 than you will with SCORM. But I don't know why. LMSs are behind. And so a lot of LMSs don't even support CMI5 or XAPI. Come on, LMSs, it's time to support that. So you can just export that out. If you do have that capability, I would recommend that because it tracks a lot more. And then you can add custom tracking when people click on buttons. And then you go ahead and click on publish. And when you click on publish, it's going to bring everything together and it's going to create a zipped file. That zipped file is what you upload to the learning management system. At the end of this, I do for sure, because right now if I don't do that, it's just going to create a folder, but I do for sure want to create a zip file. And that zip file is going to be the exact file that I upload to the LMS. I see people get caught up on this a lot of times because they don't zip it correctly, because if you zip the folder, it's not going to work when you try to upload it to the LMS. So instead of zipping the folder, allow Storyline to zip it for you, and it's going to work just fine. If you do need to unzip it for any reason, what I would say is go into that folder, select all the files, and then zip it from there. And that's the zip you probably have to drag it out to your desktop. That's the zip you then upload to your LMS. It is for sure past, we went over 30 minutes. Well, there's a lot to cover, and I at least wanted to cover the basics of starting to create slides, talk about a little bit about triggers, talk a little bit about publishing as well. And so there is a lot to cover. Now you can see the reason why that course, and I covered in the course, I cover everything extensively. You can see the reason why it's 10 hours. So it's definitely something that you work on over time. But we dive deep into the AI assistant. We dive deep into the triggers. We dive deep into text and everything you can do with text, everything you can do with images and video and other animating and all the different things, making your content interactive. We dive into conditions and adding conditions to your interactivity. There's a lot that we cover. Hopefully this just at least helps you understand the power of Storyline and how you get started with Storyline. And again, if you want to check out more, go ahead and check out more with my course. That's all I have for today. So make sure that you head on over to my website, learningdojo.ninja. You can check out all previous blog posts. I have several blogs on Storyline. You can use the filters up on top to see just Storyline as well. You can come to my courses. I have courses on several things. You can go to my downloads and you can download different sample files as well. There's a lot to do there. If you like this video, head on over to my YouTube channel, click the like button, subscribe to my channel, as well as hit the bell notification so you get notified of all future videos as they come out. That really helps my channel, allows me to continue to produce videos like these to help you and to really help you become the best learning developer that you can be, to create and go beyond what's out of the box inside of Storyline, to really master what's inside of Storyline, but to go beyond what's inside of Storyline as well. That's the goal of my channel here. That's all I have for today. So thanks everyone. I'll see you next time.